When the dwarfs came back to home, they saw that Snow White was lying on the floor very still. "Oh, no," Dar said. All the dwarfs tried to wake her up. Suddenly they saw a comb lying near the Snow White. At last, the Snow White woke up. "What happened, Snow White?" one of the dwarfs asked. "I think that comb was poisoned," Snow White said. Tsar made a fist and said, "The queen did this." On the other side, the queen threw her hairbrush and screamed. She said, "I hate Snow White." She took a deep breath and thought a plan. "Apple for sale," Snow White heard a voice when she was doing house chores. That must be a queen again, Snow White thought. "Hello, dear," the woman approached Snow White. "Do you want to buy an apple?" Snow White frowned and said, "No, thank you." "Are you sure?" the woman asked. "This one looks delicious," the woman said. I must not trust this woman, Snow White thought, but the apple looks so delicious. "Just a bite," Snow White said. Snow White took a bite and then everything went dark. On the other hand, the queen was asking the mirror, "Mirror, mirror, who is the most beautiful on this land?" Mirror said sadly, "You are my lady." At night, when the dwarfs came home late, the house was dark once again. When they entered the house, they saw that the Snow White was lying on the floor without moving. All the dwarfs started crying. They shouted her name, but she did not wake up. Then they realized that Snow White is dead. The next day, the dwarfs brought a wood coffin and gently buried the Snow White in that coffin. One day a prince was walking through the forest. He saw a dwarf resting on a wood coffin. How odd that he come down from his horse. The prince came to the dwarf and asked what happened. The dwarf told everything about the Snow White. The prince shook the wood coffin and the Snow White woke up. The prince helped the Snow White to come out of the coffin. "Thank you, sir," Snow White said. The prince could not stop himself staring at the Snow White. Actually, he was in love with the Snow White. The other dwarfs rushed over there. "Hooray!" they cried. Dar picked a piece of apple. Be careful, Snow White said. The prince dropped his one knee and said, "Please marry me." The Snow White smiled and said yes. The whole kingdom was invited to the wedding. When the queen arrived, she looked around and said, "Who is the bride?" Then she saw her. She said, "No. This cannot be Snow White." Then the queen stomped out of the wedding.